Welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. We're talking about the dangers of this country's drug epidemic. According to new reports, 2022 was the deadliest year yet for drug overdoses here in this country. We've reported extensively about how fentanyl contributes to the problem, but it's not the only factor here. Other drugs like meth and opioids are still very dangerous and still out there and still claiming lives. Let's bring in Dr. Danish Ali from Archpoint Pain Institute. You know, you and I have been focused on fentanyl, but there are still other drugs just claiming lives out there. Now, fentanyl is nothing to laugh at all. It is one of the most dangerous additives for drugs out there right now.
That's exactly right, Isaiah. As things have evolved, as it's become difficult for these drug users to obtain these drugs and these additives, it's become a shift, right? And so now folks who were readily getting fentanyl or other sorts of opioids that can no longer get it from the streets, or some even from their physicians, right? And so those folks are now resorting to these other medications and other drugs, right? So that's why we've seen a twofold increase in methamphetamine-related deaths and overdoses within the last few years as well. So again, people are now resorting to different drugs, different additives, different things, because it's become so much difficult for them to obtain the other things. And these folks need their high. They need that baseline for what they call their baseline, right? And so they've been taking these medications or these drugs for such a long time that they've got a new threshold. And so in order for them to get to that threshold, they need to take different things. And unfortunately, when you take different things, some of them it may cause other issues such as respiratory depression, seizures, heart attacks, and those sorts of things.
Now, the numbers for 2022 were the most deadly we have seen in this country in a while, and that follows the pandemic. What was it about the pandemic that made people turn to more drugs?
I think they were all homebound, right? I mean, people weren't able to get out, people weren't able to live their normal lives, and I think some of that resorted in folks trying things at home. Some of these people were obtaining Sudafed or other drugs that are available over the counter that you can mix in with these things to get highs and add to other things. And so I think...
Oh, and really quick, did telemedicine play a role with irresponsible individuals who may have been in your industry?
That's actually a great point, Isaiah. Yes, I think it made a role in it, because now folks were, calling physicians, and again, physicians were behind, it's hard to screen somebody, it's hard to examine somebody when you're behind a computer. And so I think that played a little bit of a role into it, but also the fact that people were home, they didn't have jobs. We know about the whole psychological impact that COVID played, and so I think it all kind of played a little factor into that.
And so how do we begin to deal with this in 2023? Because this is a mess that will carry on. We've talked about Narcan to help with overdoses, especially with fentanyl and opioids.
Correct.
But what else should parents do if they realize maybe a kid or a family member, a loved one, may be on drugs and
I think, Isaiah, what we're doing right now, talking about it, right? So educating our members, our community folks, talking to parents about it, talking to teachers and folks that are in the school system, coaches, right? So different folks, as long as we start talking about this and make people more aware of it, tell people that, hey, there are these things that are out there, I think that goes a long way. As you've mentioned, there are medications, other things out there that can help in case that, you develop those sorts of symptoms. But again, more than everything, I think anything is obviously try to abstain from all that stuff as much as possible. Be careful if you do obtain medications from the streets. Some of these things are laced with other drugs, right? And so be mindful of that more than anything.
And a quick reminder to the viewer out there, a lot of people think that fentanyl is its own standalone drug. Explain how that works within the realm of illicit drugs that many people may use.
Right, so it's a synthetic opioid, right? And so it's made in the labs, and what happens is that this fentanyl, just even a very small amount, is put in other things. So maybe put in your marijuana, maybe put in your cocaine, and maybe mixed with other things things to give folks that high, that excitement, those dopamine receptors, those excitement receptors, right? But what happens is that it also causes and affects other parts of your body. So it can cause respiratory depression, which means you may not breathe as well, and then it can cause heart attacks and all these other things that we know about.
And of course, for those who may be facing someone who may have the potential to have a drug overdose, especially your kid in your home, what would you tell parents to do with that?
I say talk to your child, right? Talk to your kid. Let them know that there are resources out there. Have him or her reach out to his friends, to his community leaders. There may be somebody, a pastor or a friend he gets along with. So I think the message is have communication, talk to them, and let them know it's okay to talk about this stuff, and explain to them the dangers of this, right? And so if you just go on YouTube or just Google fentanyl, you'll see the amount of deaths that have happened, folks that are laying on streets. And so, you know, showing kids these things, just like remember back in the 80s, they would show images of what happens with your lungs when you smoke tobacco, right? And so same thing you can do with alcohol and or even, you know, these sorts of drugs, is show these kids, you know, what may happen to them.
All right, Dr. Danish Ali, Arch Point Pain Institute, good to see you, sir. We still have more work to do here on The Factor. Okay.